This sprawling metropolis of Nova 9 glows under a canopy of holographic advertisements and flickering lights. Skyscrapers stretch into the smog-choked sky, their surfaces alive with digital billboards. The hum of drones and the distant roar of maglev trains fill the air. In the bustling streets below, Detective Cale Armitage, mid-40s, rugged with a haunted look in his muscular eyes, moves through the crowd. His trenchcoat billows behind him as he steps into a dimly lit alley. The outline of a body glows faintly, but there's no corpse, just a pool of dried blood, a microchip neural implant, and a single item that immediately prompts a flashback. Cale, much younger, screaming, a blinding light, a lab-coated figure looming. Cale staggers back, clutching his head. What don't I remember? Could it be Realms Unknown? Welcome to Realms Unknown, a weekly speculative fiction podcast brought to you by the Bugle, where we find within ourselves the hidden weaponized selves those sinister scientists planted so long ago. We discuss tropes, news, our favorite old shows, new shows, books, games, and more in science fiction and fantasy. I'm your host, published author and comedian Alice Fraser, and my companion on this journey, the slow-motion laughing wife under white sheets to my heartless assassin, the lab nerd to my street-smart cop, the sinister billionaire to my questionably android detective. This week is Tom Neenan. Welcome.
Hello. I like being the flashback deceased wife who got fridged to give you some inspiration to solve the case.
It's one of my. I should have saved it for a trope on the rope, really. But I have never laughed wistfully under white sheets, which is my one self-defense mechanism. Some ladies go to self-defense classes. Some ladies carry mace. I just refuse to ever have laughed whimsically under some white sheets.
It's very risky as well. The other day, I found I almost sort of playfully threw some food at someone, and then I was like, no, because that'll be something that could flash back to as well. So don't do anything that sort of represents an idyllic former life that you had.
Also, never tell anyone your tragic backstory.
Yes. Yeah. Good self-defense. It works. The results speak for themselves.
But we live in dangerous times.
Yeah.
A reminder, if you are a listener who has not yet subscribed to the Bugle channel, you can get all our stuff there ad-free. And all of the books and games and shows that we cover here or discuss here will be linked in the show notes. So if you hear anything that takes your fancy, have a look in the show notes or at buglepodcast.com. This brings us to our quick news segment. Snow White has come out after years pending and much discussion about whether it was worthy or unworthy, and it's been a sort of a resounding flop? Tom Neenan, you like to talk to birds. Would you go and see Snow White? How do you feel about Snow White?
I am I'm mixed about this. I think that you could basically, Snow White is meant to be this wonderful, it's a fantasy, it's escapism. Yet this particular production of Snow White has been so sort of mired in current day angst that it's almost, you can't really unpick it from what's been happening. We sort of the political opinions of Gal Gadot to sort of the way that, is it Rachel Ziegler who plays Snow White?
Yes, so it's been basically, it came out that they were going to do a live action reboot of the Disney classic Snow White, as they've done live action reboots of everything, because you get nostalgia rewatches from the older generations, and then you introduce a new generation to a slightly more soulless version of the previous thing.
Yes.
But they don't care, and you sell merch off the back of it, and the parents show them the new thing and then go, but actually you would like this thing, and then the kids are like, no, it moves at half the pace that I'm used to, I prefer the new thing, and the parents clutch their hair and scream. The point is, it's originally tight 90 minutes, 2D animation, very little plot, really. Just sort of a bit of wafting about. She waits around, she gets of an age, like, as a parent, to sort of see you in 16 years is a bit brutal, but that seems to be the plight of Disney parents. At least they're lucky they didn't immediately die in the first 5 minutes. But then, it's not that they've died in order to, or gotten out of the picture in order to give her space for adventure. They just give her space to sort of wander wistfully around the forest and do fuck all, and then eventually fall in love with the first man she ever sees. So it's sort of it's like, at the time it was cutting edge technology and, a fairly, non-political plot. But to reboot it in the modern age, you can't do that as a movie now. It just wouldn't work. But then, of course, they said, we're not going to do that. And then they made it very worthy that they weren't going to do it. Actually, it's a story about empowerment and girl bossing, which sort of turned off anyone who likes wistfully staring at princes. And also anyone who didn't like, who enjoyed Snow White originally and didn't like being finger wagged at for the things that they enjoyed as a child, which no one really does. And
Yeah.
then Gal Gadot sort of famously was in the IDF, and then Rachel Ziegler came out as a very pro-Palestine, thereby alienating both the pro-Israel and the pro-Palestine
Yeah.
political watchers, and also the people who don't want politics in their Disney. So everyone was out of charity before it even came out, and then turns out that it's, even if it had been good, I don't think people would have thought it was good, and I don't think it's that good.
Also, add to that the I guess the depiction of little people, little actors, because they sort of they toyed with, are they going to cast little actors? Then they went for like CGI creatures, which is, I guess, very othering to little people in general. To be like, you can't be represented via your own bodies. You have to be CG augmented people.
Yes, it's less offensive to cast a pretend creature that's vaguely reminiscent of you than it is to cast one of you.
Yeah, exactly. So it ended up, I think, what was meant to be originally quite a joyous and a bit of escapism, I think, sadly has got, caught up in, you can't escape from all of the discussions around it, and so it wasn't doing the thing that you buy the ticket for, which is take me out of my brain for 2 hours or whatever, and let me not think about things, because all you do is going, oh, I wonder if on the press tour those two had to be kept separate because they fall on two very, very sort of distinct lines of a very awful situation.
One of them might try to colonize the other.
Exactly. So yeah, I haven't seen it. I've seen mixed reviews in terms of, some people have gone, you know what, if you dispel all of that, there is fun to be had. But overall, I mean, also I think I'm slightly out of the age group who would be sort of enamored by it. But yeah, it doesn't seem to have done the job that you sort of need it to.
Remarkably political for a film that is aimed for 3 to 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
And of course, the anti-vax crowd as well, implying that death can be cured by a kiss.
And don't they all mine for diamonds as well? God, there's so much going on in this that is way dodgier than they ever wanted it to be.
It's fine. They're overseers of a blood diamond mine.
Yeah. All we need is like emeralds as well, and that one of them like then has a child who becomes Elon Musk, and the whole thing is, it's awful.
Wheel of Time is out on Amazon Prime. The new season is getting rave reviews from Wheel of Time nerds, which is does not necessarily mean the show is good. It does mean that at least the third episode went very heavy into quite obscure lore, which will please a particular segment of the audience. I don't know if you're a Wheel of Time rider. Do you ride on the Wheel of Time?
I guess so. I enjoyed the first series. I haven't gone back to it yet, but I know it's there, and I know I'll dive into it at some point. It felt like, because it's Amazon as well, isn't it? It felt like it was Amazon's holding pattern before they spent every single dollar ever produced on Lord of the Rings. So it kind of felt like it was your methadone for the Lord of the Rings heroine. But I really enjoyed it, and I think Rosamund Pike's great. And I thought it convinced me, a non-reader, that it'd be good.
Well, it feels like now in the third season they're bringing in some sort of heavy-hitting actors, but I think it suffered in the first season for casting Rosamund Pike and then some other okay actors. And all the actors are like quite good, and then you have Rosamund Pike just being Rosamund Pike at them. But I feel like they've all sort of stepped up their game, probably just by sort of passive exposure to Rosamund Pike.
Rosamund Pike also has that thing that Rupert Grint has, which is her name sounds like it could be a fantasy or sort of a genre name. Like if you cast someone, a wizard, and they were called Rosamund Pike, you'd be like, of course, that makes perfect sense. So it kind of fits in a meta level as well.
It does, but Rosamund Pike's, it does sound like sort of a warder or a ranger kind of character, or a knight or something like that. But unfortunately, Rupert Grint sounds like the hero of a children's book entitled "The Day My Bottom Committed Sabotage."
Okay, we're gonna have to do a whole Realms Unknown about how children's authors, particularly for 5 to 7-year-olds, are obsessed with children's arses. It's a weird thing. I know that it's funny and there's toilet humor, but there is a weird obsession there that needs to be examined.
It's like that classic quote about culture. Those who attempt to meet the taste of their audience begin by underestimating it, end by debauching it.
Exactly. I love that quote. I've never heard that before.
Thank you. It's one of my favorites that I respond every time someone gives me notes on a pilot.
Fair enough.
And The Electric State, the most successful Netflix thing ever, question mark, basically universally panned. Maybe Millie Bobby Brown Bon Jovi is apparently acting quite hard in it, but everything else about it is not quite clicking, despite an enormous amount of money being spent on sort of the production and the visuals. It does seem like it was very heavily written for, as they say, to be second screen friendly. Have you heard that term, second screen friendly, Tom?
I have, and that is how I watched it. I was, I'm going to show off, I was painting at the time, and I had that on in the background. I occasionally glanced up, and there was a fun robot talking to Millie Bobby Brown, and I mean, it's awful to say, on that level, I really enjoyed it. On that level, I thought it was great. I think there is, at one point, I was a bit confused, because I think at one point, Chris Pratt is saving the world to The Chain by Fleetwood Mac, I think. And I'm pretty sure he has done that already. Like, once again, notes on pilots. I occasionally get the notes, it feels like we've seen this before. And I think I've literally seen in Guardians of the Galaxy, Chris Pratt saving the world to The Chain by Fleetwood Mac. So maybe that's really just, it works. So that's what they wanted to do.
Yes, modern technology is going to be purely modular, right? You can just click one bit into the other. Isn't that the promise of AI artistry, is that you can just make up the movie you want to see?
Yes.
On the premise that audiences know what they want, which I would question mark. Your ad section now, because you can't be what you can't buy. In a world where wizards can rewrite your personality with a flick of their wand, don't risk losing yourself. With Spellsaver, you can store a backup of your true personality in this enchanted crystal orb. Spellsaver, buy one today. We will soon upgrade to a subscription service. Does your young child want a special treat? Try tricking them into thinking they're having fun by asking for a virgin snow cone at the local markets. Snow cone without syrup, what a treat! You've just handed them half a glass of water. Bad parenting without the guilt. Brought to you by Half a Glass of Water. They'll love it until their mid-20s, when they reminisce fondly about a childhood pleasure they'll suddenly realize was a lie. As a busy, sleep-deprived parent, I get tired of forgetting where I left my keys. Are you sick of forgetting what you walked into that room to get, or worse, of forgetting your entire identity? Introducing Memory Fresh, the revolutionary memory-enhancing gum. With patented NeuroBoost technology, Memory Fresh helps you recall everything from your first kiss to that secret mission you didn't even know you were on. And we cut to a montage of people chewing gum and suddenly remembering things. A woman gasps as she recalls she's a spy. Greg's eyes glow and he suddenly flips over his desk, karate chopping a coffee machine. A man realizes he's actually a robot, and a teenager remembers he left the stove on. Side effects may include existential crises, sudden urges to overthrow governments, and remembering your ex's birthday.
This week's episode is brought to you by Vaguely Celtic. Are you a high priestess of a largely Aryan fantasy village? Why not try dressing Vaguely Celtic? Cherry pick your favourite styles from across the Indo-European spectrum, but mainly shawls and long dresses. World building can be such a drain, but with Vaguely Celtic, you get a hint at a rich tapestry of history of your people without having to sew a single stitch. It's all just vaguely green and farming and also runes and stones. You get the picture. Take the stress out of having a fantasy identity with Vaguely Celtic.
And then can we put the soundtrack behind that pet of like,
Beautiful.
That sort of slightly wailing woman soundtrack has gone everywhere from like Xena Warrior Princess to like someone being murdered in a monastery.
Yeah.
That lady with her warbling wail really covers all the bases.
It really does. She's very versatile.
I often wonder what band she's in. And then also the people who play like meditation massage music. They must make a killing. Yeah. And yet you're not picking up chicks being like, I'm the gong bonger.
Yeah. Although I'd say that woman who does the wailing, and June as well, whenever there's a knife fight in June, she's there doing the wailing. That's a slightly different whaling. That's sort of more sort of Central European whaling.
Yeah.
It's all about the echo. Basically, I think the echo is doing half the work of that, isn't it? Of just like the biggest room possible to do your whaling in, so it sort of reverberates the most.
Yep.
Is sort of doing a lot of work.
She's just in an empty water cistern somewhere, wailing away,
Oh, bless her.
being farmed for her whales. One day she'll be rescued by the gong bonger from the meditation massage music band, and they'll ride off together into the sunset, making beautiful music.
Write it. Right, as they say on Twitter, write a prompt. That is a write a prompt right there.
What have you been interested in? What have you been absorbing? What have you been sucking up, Tom?
What have I been? So two things. One is a slightly older thing, which was I reread Kazuo Ishiguro's beautiful Klara and the Sun. Anyone who read Never Let Me Go, which was very popular, and maybe even saw the film, will know that Ishiguro writes about these speculative fiction futures that are they're always dystopian, but very subtly. So they involve sort of one aspect of society which is sort of a bit nauseatingly odd, and then sort of extrapolates out from that and often tells it from the point of view of sort of I guess the phrase is a naif in there, and this is what Klara and the Sun does. So it's about sort of a world where children are genetically modified sort of to do with their intelligence, and they're looked after by these androids, who I think are called AFs, so like artificial friends. And it starts in the shot.
Never bring a Chekhov's gun to a naive fight. Carry on.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is excellent. But yeah, I reread it recently. I love Ishiguro's work. I love the sort of sparse, precise writing that he does, and the fact that he often comes at things from the point of view of someone who doesn't really know a lot about the world themselves, so they discover it with you. And like Never Let Me Go, Klara and the Sun absolutely devastated me, and I loved it. And it's very digestible. It's very readable. So I love that. I also went to the cinema and saw Opus, which is, I think, falls into the category of sort of what we're talking about, because it's sort of, there's elements of Midsommar and there's elements of The Menu in there. It stars Ayo Edebiri as a music journalist who goes to see the final kind of album of John Malkovich, is a musician. And it's meant to be, and in a similar way to The Menu, which is they all travel to this sort of island to have this incredible meal cooked by Ralph Fiennes' sort of incredibly haughty chef in The Menu. And it's fun, and it owes a lot to those other films, but has a bit of its own thing to say about the cult of personality, and it's fun. But mainly, it made me think, I want to write my own version about a stand-up comedian who hasn't been seen since the 90s, who invites people to a remote location to see his final hour. And sort of the horrific twist of that film is it's all just sort of awful, probably anti-trans stuff. It's just going to be that, isn't it? It's going to be depressing, and people just be there going, "Oh, this isn't fun. This isn't like his old stuff." And it will be a him, obviously. So I'm going to write that, and it's going to be called The Hour. Look forward to that in 2027.
As it's like a stand-up comedian who I know who nudged me very excitedly in the ribs about intersectionality. And said, "You know what intersectionality means?" And I was like, I wouldn't have expected him to know what intersectionality means given his material. And he said, "It means I can tell all of the jokes I used to tell about women in the 80s, but I could just say white women now."
Yep.
And just brush off that old misogyny.
Yep.
And
Lovely
pretend
stuff.
that it's modern social commentary.
What have you been imbibing culturally this week?
I've been reading The Unorthodox Chronicles by James J. Butcher for a not very admirable reason, or I don't know if it is an admirable reason or not. Basically, I ran out of Jim Butcher books to read. I ran out of the Dresden Files, read the ones, his high fantasy ones, and then I read even his like slightly stop-startish steampunk attempt, The Cinder Spires, and I was just in a Jim Butcher mood, and I'd run out of Jim Butcher, so I thought James J. Butcher, James Butcher Jr. might have something, also a fantasy writer like his father. And so I succumbed to the promise of nepotism, or at least the hope that he might have run his drafts by his dad. And the thing that if you're in a Jim Butcher mood, you're not really in a mood for anything else, because there's a sort of a pleasing simplicity and straightforwardness to Jim Butcher's writing that can be incredibly irritating if you're looking for something more sophisticated or fancy, but sometimes it's just the thing you want. There'll be a hot lady who's attracted to him, etc., etc. There's a few, it's very uncomplicated politics. If you're in the mood for that, and actually it turned out to be quite good, quite fun fantasy. But I feel like maybe I should have maybe taken a chance on a entirely new writer. But it was a lot of fun, and I can recommend them.
Is there not a risk that people might think with the two similarly named writers that it's an Ian M. Banks situation, and that it is the same person writing both?
To be fair, I think that's what the literary agents and publishers are hoping.
Oh, fair enough. Okay.
To some degree.
Because I was very sad when Ian Banks died. I was very sad, but I was comforted by knowing that no one said Ian M. Banks had died. So I was still keeping hope that he was still out there somewhere.
And that brings me to Trope on a Rope, which is one of our favorite tropes, something that either irritates you every time you see it or fills you with delight every time it comes around the corner of a piece of speculative fiction. Tom, what's your trope on a rope for this week?
Okay, I'm going to talk about a piece of fiction which is non-speculative, which is very earthy and down to earth, which is Adolescence. Everyone's talking about that on Netflix. It's incredible if you haven't seen it. Stephen Graham and Jack Thorne's dramas in 4 parts, in 1 hour unbroken shots about a young boy and his sort of violent tendencies. It's amazing, but it made me think of the sci-fi trope, which people obviously, they talked about this and the impact of social media and the impact of having phones, and it's all in there. But I think an unspoken element of this is the trope, which is the special little boy, because so much fiction is you feel rubbish and you feel bad, but you know what? Secretly, you're a very special little boy. Not only are you a special little boy, you're the most important little boy in the whole world. And it happens quite a lot. I think I haven't read Ender's Game. I understand there's an element to that. Obviously, Harry Potter has the thing of like, even though life is bad now, you know what? You're the most important boy in the world. And I think, I know, I'm obviously extrapolating a lot here and using hyperbole, but I would like to see more stories in which they're about people achieving incredible things, but not because of any predestined thing about them being such a special little boy. They sort of tried to do that with Star Wars when it was like, you know what, Rey, you just, your parents were junk traders. And then it was like, no, but your granddad was the most evil man in the world and you are very special. And I kind of want to see more stuff which is about people sort of who aren't predestined to be amazing, because I think what you do is you implant in especially little boys' minds. They go, haha, okay, I might not be happy now, but I'm a special little boy and I'm incredibly powerful. And sort of everyone else's story is just in service of my story. And I think that is, that can be sometimes worrying. And I often think about like another kid at Hogwarts who was in the same year as Harry, who just worked really hard, but didn't like get up to mischief and just had to be like, okay, they're getting all the commendations and they're getting all the house points, are they? So yeah, I don't really know what my solution to that is, but basically I want to fight against the trope of special magical little boys, because I think it implants in little boys' heads the idea that they are the main character and everyone else services their arc, which I think can be damaging. Do I think that will solve the knife crime problem in the UK? No, probably not.
Yeah, I feel like the special little boy problem is maybe counterbalanced by the idea that, as far as I can tell, many of my daughter's playmates have in the local playground, which is that the fairies and unicorns are going to come and be their friends. You know what? Unicorns think you're dumb. Unicorns are really into cyberbullying.
These kids need to learn. Yeah.
Fairies are
brutal lessons, but ones that will, they'll pay off down the road.
To be fair, in Peter Pan, in the Disney
Mm.
Peter Pan, Tinkerbell is a bit of a see you next Tuesday. I'm just saying. She's got some real like.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, she like tries to sabotage Wendy. She like immediately conceives this like real sexual jealousy of a 10-year-old girl.
Has there been much evil fairy literature? I feel like it must have been done at some point. Someone must have explored the kind of what if fairies were malevolent side of things.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, you think about the evil fairy godmother in Sleeping Beauty, for example.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Not all fairies are good.
Moral of the story of Sleeping Beauty: invite everyone to the party. So my trope on a rope is being able to sense someone entering a crowded room. You're in a ballroom, you're in a backyard, you're at a nightclub, and then all of a sudden, the pounding of the music goes dull in your ear, and you can see them moving in slow motion through the crowd. The crowd may be in slow motion and they're in normal motion, or maybe the crowd is in normal motion and they're in slow motion. Whatever is happening, they're bending physics around them. And you have noticed them in movies. It's often very visual. In books, sometimes you can recognize their smell, which is like, it's got to be pretty overpowering if it's in a crowded room to have drifted all the way across to you. But yeah, that is my trope on a rope, and I have to say I enjoy it, even though it irritates me every time. It's one of those mixed blessings when I see it, because I know it's going to mean exciting things happening further down the line.
I've been watching the new Daredevil series on Disney Plus, which I think is excellent, by the way. I'm really enjoying it. I think it's incredible. They do lean into that slightly, which is that Matt Murdock, despite being blind, they really lean into but all your other senses are heightened, but to a ludicrous degree. Like you say, he is able to, in a crowded room, isolate a person outside on the phone and what the person on the other end of the phone is saying to them and things. And I do think that he's meant to be just a normal guy. I don't think he's got any superpowers. He just has sort of heightened abilities, but that has a similar element to it, which is just this almost extrasensory perception that he possesses, which is extremely impressive.
Yeah, and potentially quite risky if you happen to lose your sight and then think you're going to be able to like pick a lock at 1,000 yards with your special new hearing.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know what expectations this new series is setting, but people are going to be disappointed.
And that brings us to our subgenre submarine. Our deep dive this week is in tribute to Severance. We're looking at sci-fi and fantasy, speculative fiction stories about memory modification, identity rewrites, multiple selves in both sci-fi and fantasy. Memory modification is a super interesting narrative thread, whether it's someone waking up a super soldier without a memory, like in the Bourne Identity, someone whose memories can be swapped in and out of a host body, as in the Joss Whedon show Dollhouse, or someone with a secret hidden memory, as in Total Recall, or its Genesis story, We Can Remember It For You, Wholesale by the giant Philip K. Dick. Severance, obviously, is the most recently big in popular culture version of this. One of the oldest is probably The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That might be the original, you've got another self that you don't know, doing stuff that you can't remember. And it plays with, fears about who we are, what we remember, our knowledge, that our memories are not actually as good as we would like them to be. You can explore identity, memory, the kind of absolute fear of dementia and things like the heavily debunked memory retrieval therapies that ended up with the satanic panic of the 90s. You can go in that. You've got the idea that the body remembers even if your mind doesn't, and so your body starts to remember even if you're having all these memory modifications. And then on the flip side, you have things like altered carbon, where the bodies are just sleeves and the people are uploaded into and out of them. There's a book, Ancillary Justice, which plays with memory and the idea of good versus what side you're on, as well as having a really fun play with gender and assumptions about that. So everyone is she in those books without being sort of heavy-handed or righteous about it. It makes you really examine your ideas. You don't know what gender someone is until their behavior sort of reveals it later along the line. Everyone is default she, which is a lot of fun. Greg Egan, Reasons to be Cheerful, has the idea that you can control your own personality with sliders that you visualize in your head. And so you can actually change your personality on the fly deliberately. The promise of therapy, perhaps, fulfilled. As far as games recommendations, Soma by Frictional Games has consciousness transfer robots that have the consciousness of real people uploaded into them. A lot of existential angst with them. And apparently is one of the best stories in video games that was recommended to us by Christofka on Blue Sky. And then you have things like The Prestige, which asks and answers the transporter problem of Star Trek, which is if your body gets transported, what happens to the old body? There's some people who believe that the old self dies and a new self is born without any memory of the process of dying. In this, every time a Star Trek character uses a transporter. Do you have any favorite memory modification fiction?
I do indeed. Well, I got very excited because I read a few years ago. I read The Shining Girls by Lauren Books, which I think is Books is how it's pronounced. Forgive me if that's incorrect.
Books.
Anyway,
Books.
She wrote her books, and it was made into a TV series with Elizabeth Moss. And I remember this being because that's all about
Those.
Most.
Sorry,
Alexandra.
I'll stop. Stop. I'm a dick.
So The Shining Girls, which I thought was all about memory modification, because what it's a time traveling serial killer who sort of lives in this house, and it's incredibly complex. And I love the way that it's rendered in the book, and the TV series grapples with it really well. But actually, because time is constantly changing, because this serial killer is channeling back and forth, Elizabeth Moss is sort of constantly having to readjust to different states of reality. But actually, Elizabeth Moss pretty much stays the same consistently throughout. So it's the complete opposite of what you were talking about. So I got really excited, like, to talk about The Shining Girls. And I was like, actually, no, that is the opposite. She stays consistent while the realities kind of shift around her as different timelines coalesce around this killer. But it's well worth reading, so do read that. I recently saw Companion, which I think I discussed on this show, and in that there is the ability for this android lady to adjust, like you say, the sliding scales of her intelligence and her personality, and she sort of plays with those throughout, and that's a really fun way of sort of augmenting her ability to survive the situation.
Westworld did that as well. I think Westworld had
Yes.
the sliders on an iPad for that very thing, and it also wrestles with the same question of memories being rewritten and overwritten.
Yes, yeah, and actually, there's Companion has a whole thing about meet cutes. It kind of makes meet cutes an algorithmic thing which ties you to your to the person who's bought you if you're an android. So that's really interesting. And because I haven't mentioned it yet, I should mention there's always a Doctor Who story to go along with these things. And obviously different, memories changing and time changing and all those things happens a lot. But I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, the Doctor Who story Mordrin Undead, Peter Davison's story, which purely because it involves two different versions of the Doctor's former companion, the Brigadier, one from 1975 and one from 1983, I think. And they're both toying with what memories they have to try and solve something. So they're both trying to sort of remember things that the other did. And it also comes after the Brigadier had a breakdown. So that is another fractured memory, fractured personality element in there. So thematically, it plays a lot with memory and what plays into your personality. And it's a very interesting story. So I'd recommend that one.
So I'm not a mega Doctor Whoist, but surely the central premise of the Doctor being reborn into new bodies with sort of new personalities as well, is kind of the fundamental premise of the renewal of the Doctor, is that they are the same person but also not the same person.
Exactly. Now, I would have obviously recommend, say, like the 3 Doctors or the 5 Doctors, which is where different iterations of the Doctor meet. Usually, though, that's just used to sort of have a bit of weird banter where they're like, I don't look as handsome as I used to. They very rarely play with like the sort of take that seriously. It's more just an opportunity for sort of 3 actors to be in a room bantering, which is fun, but not what we're looking for
Get
here.
a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
And I almost missed out one of my favorites, which is sort of part of a larger series, which is Memory by Lois Master Bujold, who I will consistently recommend, part of the Vorkosigan series. So it sort of doesn't stand alone, but is, as a standalone story, very good. In it, Simon Ilian, who's the head of the secret police, has an eidetic memory chip, so he cannot forget anything, and he's now the head of security. He gets promoted in the early books from being just sort of a wide-eyed young man who was the only
Mm.
person who happened to survive these implantations of these. So he's the only one of his kind. But he's become and has been the head of the secret police for many years. And so much of the functional operating memory of this institution is in his head. And then someone, spoiler alert, he gets sick and starts to lose memories, and he starts to lose this magical capacity to remember everything, and it sort of undermines the security of the whole planet, functionally speaking. And that, so it's simultaneously sort of a detective novel, but he's in kind of a loco parentis, or like an uncle figure to our central character. So there's also the same thing that happens with any elderly relative who starts to lose their memory or have personality slippage, and then how much of your personality is your memory and how much of it is not. So I think that's really fun and fantastic. I recommend that. Memory by Los Master Bujold.
Amazing.
And that brings us to our Minds of section. Tom Neenan, have you been delving through the Minds of to bring us something from your past that you loved but maybe wouldn't necessarily recommend?
Well, I have a question for this. Okay, so this comes off the back of what we were discussing earlier, which is, this is something I'd almost like to throw out to listeners as well. What is the situation with dwarves? Because I know that there's different spellings. There's dwarves with a V and there's dwarfs with an F. One refers to people in the actual real world who have dwarfism, and the other is sort of a mythical thing. But I was rewatching the Two Towers recently. Obviously, we all love Gimli. Gimli's a great character, and he is a dwarf of the dwarves with a V, I think. But I want to know, how problematic is that? And also off of the back of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, I want to know sort of. I feel like I'm sort of I'm behind on the conversation here about what's considered a good representation and what's considered bad. For instance, there's a really good film called Living in Oblivion, where there's sort of about the process of making a film, and they hire a little actor because they're doing a dream sequence, and it's really funny because the actors, they're going, I'm a little person, I dream less about little people than people do in films. It's like this awful trope, which I guess comes from a bit like from David Lynch as well. Not that I'm trying to cancel the brilliant David Lynch, but obviously in Twin Peaks, there's the little person who exists in the dream fantasy world and stuff like that. So I found myself going back over a lot of fiction like that and going, how is sort of the representation and the othering of little people as, magical or as mysterious or as sort of I don't know, so people who communicate from the beyond, that kind of thing. Even, I guess, like, I'm not sure if she was a little person in Poltergeist, but they certainly play with the idea that she's sort of a small lady in Poltergeist with a very high voice. So yeah, I guess, like, I go because I don't know how
How
I
to
don't
feel about it.
exactly. Yeah. And I'd love, and obviously also that also comes with the perspective that you don't want people to be out of work. And would I say, like, for instance, the Oompa Loompas in the 1970s Willy Wonka film, like, you wouldn't go, oh, they can't, I wouldn't want them to work. But it's interesting that we've gone from those actors then to Deep Roy, probably the most prolific small actor of all, who turns up basically everywhere. He's in the X-Files, he's in Doctor Who, he can't be stopped. To then Hugh Grant, who is not a little person in the most recent Willy Wonka. And is that right to deprive someone of a job there? I'd love to read some articles about this. If anyone has any recommendations of things to look at, then I'd love to read it.
Yeah, well, it is always interesting when you get to questions of representation in fiction and how close you can get. I remember seeing Ken Watanabe as the king in The King and I, where it was like everyone's like, "Oh, at last, it's not Yul Brynner and Yellowface," and you're like, "But he is Japanese."
Yeah. There is still a difference. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's more offensive or less offensive to be like, "Oh yeah, he's one of them." So it's okay.
I mean, for instance, I was delighted that I was watching Late Night with the Devil, which is, if you're a horror fan, I absolutely recommend it. I think it's brilliant. And for a split second in it is, I believe, your fellow countryman and comedian, Iman Hatchiti has like a really quick cameo in that film. But obviously, I think it's kind of to demonstrate how the show, that this like late night talk show, was sort of playing for like cheap laughs, because he is a little person, and I can't remember what he was doing, but he was doing some kind of novelty act. So you balance in the fact that oh great, it's Iman Hatchiti's in a movie
Hey,
that
it's
I'm
Iman,
seeing.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. But obviously, yeah. So I'd love to know. Also, I had the pleasure of seeing Iman Hatchiti when he was in London, and there were two really stoned guys, and he was in Sainsbury's, and two really stoned guys walked in, and they just sort of absolutely perplexed just watched him walk around Sainsbury's. And I don't know if that's a funny story or if that's if that's an offensive story, but they were just absolutely enamored. But then he probably wants to just be treated like a normal person. So who knows? Tell me. I am a tabula rasa on this.
Yep. Please, if you have thoughts for Tom Neenan on this fraught
Mm.
issue, how should he feel about media that includes the fictional race of dwarves or media that represents little people, for better or worse? Email us. realmsunknown@thebuglepodcast.com is the email address. Or if you want to send in a recommendation for a book or a movie or a game that I should engage with, you can convince me in my Convince Me section. And 3 things to take away into the world. Why not read or even reread Tom's recommendation of Klara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro? How about diving into some memory modification books? Maybe you've already read them, but you don't remember. Things like Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie or Reasons to be Cheerful by Greg Egan. Remember, all of the books and shows and games mentioned here are included in the show notes with links in our affiliate bookshop store. And finally, also on memory modification lines, if you're a Doctor Who fan or want to become one, look out for the Mordrin Undead episode of Doctor Who. That brings me to the end of this episode of Realms Unknown. Tom Neenan, have you got anything to plug?
Always. Yeah, I've been very much enjoyed, because my writing things, I'm still sort of knee deep in development and things, so I've got nothing to kind of show off and wave around there, but I am still producing art, and I've just got, and I'm sorry to say this, I've become a cliche, I have an Etsy shop as well, because it is slightly easier to, I have a big cartel store as well, but Etsy's quite good at like algorithmically guiding people to things that you do. So if you'd like to visit that is Tom Neenan Art on Etsy as well, and I'm selling original paintings and things on there. I just did a Patton Oswalt that I really liked, because I'm trying to sort of paint people who maybe wouldn't get a painting normally, but who definitely deserve one. So and also I'll be any recommendations for people to paint, then hit me up on TP Neenan on Instagram as well, and I'll try and get around to them.
Didn't you just get a commission from a Realms Unknown listener?
I did indeed. Yes, I just took ownership of a new purple oil paint that I used to complete it, so I'm very excited about that. So yeah, hit me up. I love, especially if it's something which is sort of a very specific idea to you. Yeah, let's work on it together. It becomes a little what's the word? Collaboration. Why did I struggle with that word? But it's collaboration of different sort of mediums and ideas, and I love it. So please get in touch.
Wonderful. And you can find me online at patreon.com/Alice Fraser. You can join me for my twice weekly writers meetings, about to become 4 times weekly writers meetings that you can sign up for at patreon.com/Alice Fraser. There's also my Swiss writers retreats if you'd like to join me in Switzerland for a week and write or work on whatever creative thing you're working on with my help and the help of our guest teachers. Other than that, you can find my book, A Passion for Passion, wherever good books are sold, aka the internet. It's out in the UK now in bookshops. You can order it at your local bookshop, or it will be out in Australia and the US on the 5th of May. This is a Bugle Podcast and Alice Fraser production. Your editor is Ped Hunter. Your executive producer is Chris Skinner. I'll talk to you again next week.